We must make it easier, faster, and less expensive to build housing of all kinds.
It's worse than what they think. They might be underestimating how quick and how easy it's going to be to make some of the changes that are needed.
I'm signing executive order immediately following this speech, directing state agencies to review all regulations that impact housing, permitting, and construction.
They're saying all the right things, and I really appreciate that. I just don't think they understand how bad the problem is.
Here in the north end of Bainbridge Island is one of the gems of not only Puget Sound, but our entire state. That's the Blowdale Reserve. Prentice and Virginia Blowdale set out to create a botanical garden. They set out to create a Japanese-style grounds. And you walk through the wooded lands and across the grasslands and so forth, you'll see all these influences just jump out at you. Blowdale home is now the Manor House, and it's open to the public, and you can tour it today, as well as look at the other very interesting buildings. It truly is a beautiful spot, and it truly is one of my favorite places.
To our Republican media availability. We appreciate you joining in today. With us from the House Republican Caucus, we have House Republican Deputy Leader Chris Corey of the 15th District and Floor Leader April Connors from the 8th District. From the Senate Republican Caucus, we have Senate Republican Leader John Braun of the 20th District and Operating Budget Leader Chris Gildon from the 25th District. And with that, I will turn it over to Representative Corey for some opening remarks.
Well, good morning, everybody, and happy 16th day of session. As John mentioned, I'm Deputy Republican Leader Chris Corey. It's a pleasure to be with you all this morning. As you know, short session, lots going on, and no doubt week 3, we're continuing to move forward. It's kind of a mixed bag around here right now, right? We've got a number of things going on this week that are pushing forward that will make life more expensive for Washingtonians. A couple that I want to highlight here. They're moving House Bill 2275, which is going to increase a new utility surcharge on folks. So Washingtonians' bills are going to get more expensive when they go to pay their heat and gas and so on and so forth. We've got a new bill that will make clothing even more expensive by expanding producer responsibility, which is going to hit probably working Washingtonians the most. And last and certainly not least, and one we've talked about before, and I think highlights the real disconnect between Olympia and the rest of the state, is House Bill 2421, which is a new tire fee that gets added to the cost of new tires. And in and of itself, obviously, if you're a working Washingtonian and you're having to replace tires, that's no small expense in your budget. But beyond that, this bill prohibits you from even knowing you're paying a fee. So I think the message here is that the majority in Olympia understands that a lot of their taxes and fees are unpopular. So instead of addressing those, they're just going to make sure that you don't know about them. So obviously, we in the House Republican Caucus, and I assume my colleagues in the Senate, are going to make sure that we're as transparent as humanly possible. We've got a lot of questions that we're getting coming in, so I'm going to end my comments there because we're going to have a lot of those, and I'm going to turn it over to Senate Minority Leader John Braun.
Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate your aspiration there. John Braun, State Senator for the 20th Legislative District and Senate Minority Leader, Republican Leader, thank you for being here today. It's important that we do this regularly, and that the interest you take in what's going on in Olympia and how it affects citizens around the state, I think, is truly important. So thank you for your work. I'm going to be fairly brief, and you've heard me talk about this for a couple weeks now, actually longer than that. The priorities for the people of the state of Washington are affordability, affordability, affordability. And we've gotten the majority to say the word, but I don't think they know what it means. It feels a little like Princess Bride here. They keep saying the word affordability, but yet, as Chris said, most of the time in the first third of session, we're almost a third of the way through, has been hearing bills like an increase on the tobacco tax, the most regressive tax in the state, a hearing on tires, speculation still hasn't been actually dropped, but a speculation about an income tax. And as Representative Stokesbury said last week, an income tax, and the people see this for what it is, an income tax on anyone will ultimately be an income tax on everyone. And what we know of it so far is it's an absolute attack on small and medium-sized businesses. Then last night, we had another hearing on a couple of new taxes in Ways and Means. One of them that would very clearly, everybody recognized, would very clearly add to the cost of pharmaceuticals across our state. Instead of really having a discussion and thinking about what this does to the cost of living in our state, we have a Democratic majority insisting that this is the only fair way to do it. When the only fair way to deal with affordability is to increase the cost of living for everyone, I think they misunderstand what the word means. Simple as that. So I'm going to stop right there. There's lots to talk about. I look forward to your questions. Again, thanks for being here.
All right. With that, we'll go to questions, starting with Jerry Cornfield of the Washington State Standard.
Good morning. I wanted to ask, late yesterday, Representative Jim Walsh issued a statement condemning Governor Ferguson's comments yesterday, saying they're escalation and they're inflaming tensions. Is that the position of the Republican caucuses in both chambers, that the statements by the governor and the attorney general are escalating tensions?
So, yeah, I want to take that question, Jerry. Obviously, we haven't sat down as a caucus to have a quote unquote caucus position. We've got a very diverse group of legislators who have a variety of feelings on the topic. I'll tell you, the one thing that I think we are all in agreement on is that any death in our country, any shooting like that is a tragedy, no matter what the circumstances are, right? First and foremost, it's a human being. It's somebody who was, God breathed life into, so we care about them. To Jim's statement, I think what we're seeing is a lot of politicians upping the rhetoric, escalating, and that's not what we need right now. We need transparency. We need an investigation. We need to make sure those things happen. It's true whether it's in Minnesota or Washington, but unfortunately, a lot of politicians are seeing this as a moment for their time to get in the spotlight, to make it about them, and to make it about catching news headlines. No, this should be about letting law enforcement do what it needs to do to understand and have a true investigation, figure out what all the facts are, and then hold people accountable if either laws, rules, or procedures were broken. End of story. We want that with any level of government, and it doesn't take the governor of a state, 1,000 miles away, interjecting it and making it more political. That's, I think, what's probably causing a lot of this inflamed rhetoric, and it needs to stop. We need to go back to doing our problem, focusing on our problems here in Washington. Obviously, we should be aware of what's going on, but holding press conferences to take up space in an issue that obviously is concerning, but is not actually helpful or adding to solving the problem of what's going on in Minneapolis right now.
Yeah, Jerry, that's an important question. I appreciate it. And I agree with everything that Chris said. Look, the incidents in Minnesota were tragic. They deserve a full, impartial, and careful investigation to understand what was wrong. And to the extent there is wrongdoing, folks should be held accountable. It should be as simple as that. But to incite the public in the way that the governor has done, I think is unserious and frankly incendiary. And it takes us away from the important work that we need to do here in Washington. He's diverting attention from the very important challenges we have here in Washington. And I don't think that's good for anybody. Look, the federal government has a responsibility to enforce federal law. Their efforts to remove folks who are in our country illegally are legitimate and necessary. And many in the public think that the federal government's efforts may have been over the top in proportionality or fairness and legitimacy. I can understand that, but exciting the public and to react more strongly, I think is unserious and does not help the problem. We need calm, careful leadership right now, and frankly, the governor's failed on that score. And I just reinforce one last thing is we have really big challenges here in the state of Washington. And I don't want to take away from the tragic events in Minnesota, but I also don't want to be diverted from our very real problems here. And that's what I think the governor is doing more than anything.
Did you have a follow-up, Jerry?
I guess to that question, because there'll be an important vote in the Senate tomorrow on the face coverings bill. Why does it seem the Republicans in the House and Senate are unable to criticize or what's happening at the federal level, given what you've seen for weeks on the enforcement, and why are Republicans supportive of letting law enforcement cover their faces when doing the job?
Well, I guess here's what I would say. Two things. One, we actually have to have a Washington state legislative nexus as part of our rules in order to be engaging on a lot of these issues. So we have to be methodical and thoughtful. There's different rules for the executive branch and how they can engage on these issues. So that's their prerogative, even if it is unwise. As far as this face coverings the bills go, it's complicated, Jerry. Like anything else, it's complicated. There's more than one side to this issue. And part of the problem here is we're seeing a specific targeting of law enforcement agents, specifically ICE, and some of those carrying out their lawful duties. And so they've been subject to doxing, harassment, attacks. And so a lot of them feel like this is the only way to keep themselves safe. And you don't have to take my word for it. Look what happened in Minneapolis last week with that pastor who, churchgoers exercising their religious rights were harassed and, their house of worship was interrupted. These are real consequences for stuff like this, and we need to make sure that we're aware of those. We also want to make sure that that we're not putting, our own law enforcement officers in this state under some sort of unintended consequence of having to not wear face masks. And we've heard from some that say in certain duties, in certain situations, SWAT and other, they have to. So, we got to think more critically about this. Again, part of our concern, or at least I'll say part of my concern, is this. We are using state resources and time to get involved in federal issues. I do not see any way, and I haven't seen any information to the contrary, that our decision to tell people they can't wear masks will actually have an impact on federal law enforcement officers. So that's another thing we're critical of. So again, I think for me, it's about focusing on what is actually at issue here in the state and not about turning our 60-day session into a referendum on the other Washington.
Hey, Jerry, I disagree with your assessment that Republicans aren't willing to push back. We just made comments. We believe the events in Minnesota should be properly investigated. And folks, if there's wrongdoing after that investigation, they should be held accountable. The fact that we aren't inciting folks to further violence is calm, serious leadership and focused on the issues we have in front of us. So I think you're completely misreading it. And as far as the masking bill, this really is a distraction. It's very clear. that this is not enforceable on federal law enforcement officers. But even if it is, if you go read the bill, they can take off their blast masks, but it's okay to put on an N95 mask, so they can still be masked under this very bill. This bill is 100% a distraction from the real issues. Let's focus on the real issues put in place by the Biden administration by letting somewhere between 10 and 16 million folks into our country illegally over the course of those 4 years. And now we're trying to deal as responsibly as possible, and frankly imperfectly, with the situation we have in front of us. But distracting, taking on the federal government, and refusing to work cooperatively are doing much more harm than good. Look around the country. We are not having the events we see in Minnesota and other states where they have allowed local and state law enforcement officials to cooperate professionally with federal law enforcement officers. They're doing it carefully and thoughtfully and trying to minimize exposure to the public wherever they can. Instead, we have the Democratic majority and the Democratic governor here in the state of Washington not only refusing to to cooperate and work together where it makes sense, actually inciting more violence. This is you got it wrong here. The folks who are trying to do this reasonably are the ones right in front of you right now. The folks who are trying to use it as a political tool are the governor and the Democratic majorities here in the state of Washington.
All right, next we'll go to Simone Carter of McClatchy.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I wanted to ask, there's a Senate bill that would expand the state health department's authority to find the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma when and if the department isn't allowed to inspect the facility. What do your caucuses think of this proposal and its potential implications related to immigration enforcement in Washington?
Similar to the last conversation, it is us trying to regulate the feds in an area that I don't believe we have the ability to regulate. So
we've been down this path before. The Democratic majority has used several different legislative maneuvers to try to undermine that facility because they don't like the facility, and they have every right to have an opinion about that. But they, like everyone else, have to follow state and federal law. And while they can change state law, if they want to make it at odds with federal law, they're going to have to change federal law. And instead of doing that, they're just trying to harass the federal government because they don't like their current policies. That's not the way this is supposed to work.
Did you have a follow-up, Simone?
Nope, thank you.
All right, next we will go to Sophia Sostern from the Seattle Times.
Morning, everyone. Jerry sort of beat me to my question a little bit, but I'm hoping for a little bit more information about Senate Bill 5855 moving to the floor tomorrow. And we know that Governor Ferguson has urgently supported this bill multiple times, and the wide majority of Republicans have opposed it. And so I'm wondering if there's a version of this bill that you all would support, whether it be through amendments, if there is any other version of the bill that you all could support if it got changed, or if you're just strictly opposed.
So I want to be clear on the bill. I don't think we have any desire any more than anyone else to see our federal law enforcement officers wearing masks. They feel like they're in a position where they have to wear masks because the Democrats in the state have escalated up the threats against them. They've put them in situations that are inherently more risky to themselves and ultimately even to their families. So if the Democrats really want to work on this issue with the Republicans, it starts by backing up and trying to find, go after the root causes. How do we turn the volume down on the conflict in our state and for others around the country? How do we allow for some reasonable amount of cooperation with federal law enforcement officials? How do we protect law enforcement from doxing, from harassment, when they are trying to enforce the law as it's written? And I understand they may disagree with the law. That happens to all of us sometimes. But the right way to do that is not to encourage or allow for situations where law enforcement officers, and in many cases, their families, can be under threat. That does not solve the problem. And then, as I said earlier, this law is functionally ineffective. We have pretty, concrete basis to say this will not be enforceable in any way. And even if it was, they could just shift to N95 masks and achieve the same thing. All this is a distraction from the fundamental issue, which is how do we reasonably, responsibly, seriously enforce federal law and do it in a way that lines up with our state values. And the Democrats are using it for politics instead of for doing any of that.
Yeah, I guess I would say I'll take this more seriously when they come up with a proposal that also talks about protecting officers and their families from doxing, threats, intimidation, harassment, and so on and so forth. So if we're going to talk about protecting people, it needs to be on both sides of the coin.
Thank
Do you have a follow-up, Sophia?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. Next, we'll go to Mitchell Rowland of the Spokesman Review.
Morning, guys. House Bill 2989, which would have kind of effectively prohibited local jurisdictions from enforcing anti-camping legislation, local ordinances, was originally scheduled for a vote in the House Housing Committee today. And I know that Rep. Connor sits on that committee. That bill, or the vote, was delayed. I was wondering if there is any additional insight or kind of any update on the status of the bill.
Sure, that's Rep. Gregerson's bill. It's very similar to the camping bill that she ran last year that does not allow cities to be able to move people that are camping on public rights of way, let's say a public soccer field, if they don't have a place to put them into a housing shelter. That bill was delayed due to the fact that there's continued work being done on the bill. It's my understanding it will be up for a vote in the Housing Committee next week. We are standing by to wait for a striker on that bill before we can start preparing more amendments that help make clarification on the bill for our cities.
So you anticipate it to come back next week?
Anticipating it back next week, correct. A lot of cities very concerned. We've had letters from, all over Washington State. The cities are very, very worried about how this will be implemented, how many beds are available, how they're going to keep their parks and their communities safe, as well as they're really worried about the ability for anyone who is unhoused or homeless to be able to sue the cities if they are moved incorrectly by local officials.
Did you have a follow-up, Mitchell, or did anybody else want to weigh on that?
I did have a question about a separate bill. House or Senate Bill 5828 would restore funding to cuts that were made to the Washington College Bound and Washington College grants during last legislative session, particularly for private universities in the state. I was wondering if from your perspective, if for anyone, if that's something your caucus is open to, or if there's been any kind of conversations on that idea.
Yeah, and this is not a bill that we have caucused on, but I think broadly our caucus is supportive of expanding college bound to the private universities. It's one of the best values for the state when you look at all money in, how we get our students through a four-year baccalaureate degree in particular, and a place where our state is frankly not doing all that well. So I think we would support it, but it needs to be done in a thoughtful and budget process that doesn't rely on new taxes to pay the bill. So I mean, philosophically supportive. How we get it done, I think is maybe a more challenging question.
Yeah, so I have Heritage University in my district. It's one of the private nonprofit schools in the state that effectively students were just kneecapped during last year's session because they already had this money. And it was just arbitrarily cut in order to balance a budget that gave, raises to certain constituencies, but cut from everywhere else. So I think it's an important one. I think it's probably got a lot of bipartisan support to bring back. We'll say it was an unintended consequence of last year's session, but I know speaking to, specifically my experience with Heritage University in the lower valley of Yakima, it is serving a really diverse and broad set of students that are in unique circumstances that maybe the University of Washington or WSU aren't a right fit for their family life or situation. So I think this is something that, we can probably broadly get behind, but also agreeing with Senator Braun that, the reaction can't be, we'll just add a new tax to pay for it. So more consideration is on the way for that, I believe.
All right. Oh, all right. Next, we'll go to Carlene Johnson of the Center Square.
Okay, my first question, and I have two, if that's okay. I wanted to ask you, Senator Braun, about 6205, if I'm not messing that up, that is set for a hearing tomorrow to hold these NGOs accountable and require some additional reporting that we currently don't have. I'm glad you're getting a hearing for this, but do you have any thoughts ahead of that important public hearing? I know they've set you, looks like, last in the hearing, so we might have limited testimony on this.
Yeah, so I'm very pleased that we're getting a hearing. This is an important issue, and it goes into the broader concerns with fraud that are prevalent across our state and across a number of different programs. This particular bill, as I think probably folks may already know, deals with the double dealing we saw was exposed last summer in the mortgage assistance programs that the legislature put in place to help some particular ethnicities. And while I didn't support the program, if we're going to do the program, it should be done well and reasonably without, if not actual illegal fraud, certainly moral fraud, where they chose folks who were related either by family or by position to the organizations, and provided in some cases multiple grants to particular people who were within their circle, but then told other folks who by the statutory rules would be eligible, that there was just no more money left. A clear misuse of public funds, and this is a very straightforward way to make sure that use of those funds is transparent, open to the public, and ultimately these folks are accountable for making sure they execute on the program as envisioned, not as they would prefer for the benefit of their own friends and family. And I guess I'd say one more thing, whether we're talking about this or some of the, I think, credible allegations within DCYF or even within paid family leave, the public is very, very frustrated. I would even say angry at the level of fraud or suggested fraud in our state. Normal people who get up every day, go to work, are supporting their families, supporting their community, paying their taxes. They feel the fool because they're following the rules, and the state is not doing their best to investigate this, to hold folks accountable where there is misbehavior, and even if there's not misbehavior, explaining what the situation is so it's transparent and they understand and they have a little more faith in state government. We are undermining faith in state government because we're not acting promptly enough to get after these things.
My other question, I spoke
Arlene, I think April was going to add something real quick.
Oh, so please, I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, all good. So, Carlene, that was something that I'd been working on during the interim as well. As you probably know, I am a licensed real estate agent. So when we saw all of this fraud happening, I also sit on the Covenant Home Ownership Oversight Committee that is watching how many of these loans are going out to constituents across Washington state, as well as what was happening with the stacking with community reinvestment programs. So any additional questions you have on that, I have the House Bill 2153, which was a bipartisan bill in the House to get more accountability on these programs. So happy to answer additional questions on that if you want them.
Thank you.
Carlene, before you go to your next question, I just want to make a point here that I think is salient given what's going on right now. In the same vein that we are calling for, transparency and accountability on issues around ICE and whatnot, I think we're having that same approach here with the fraud allegations. It is not, assume it's all correct, right? Based on what social media is saying and news is saying, and just push forward. It's saying, if there is a problem, let's find out. If there's not, we can exonerate. We can, actually celebrate the fact that Washington doesn't have fraud, but we should at least be doing sensible and common sense audits. It's the least we can do for our taxpayers who are giving us all this money, and they want to make sure it's being used right. So I think, whatever the news story is, we're trying to react in a professional, responsible way as electeds to make sure that we're doing our due diligence on the topic.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I spoke with Rep. Mike Keaton last weekend. He's introduced that House Joint Memorial to opt Washington State into that $1,700 tax credit for education. WEA is opposed, so OSPI is opposed. The governor's kind of not given a firm answer, but says he's looking into it. We've got only until the first of next year to opt in. I'm told it could generate more than $700 million a year for education, both public and private. So why would we not have any of you had any conversations with any Democrat leadership about this, or the governor in your conversations, like why we wouldn't opt in?
So I think it's crazy that we haven't already opted in. I mean, our taxpayers can already use this, that just the benefit won't go, if we don't opt in, the benefit won't go to students here in our state. So the idea that we wouldn't do this seems just crazy to me. I have sent a letter to the governor asking for him to act on this, and I just talked to him during our meeting last week, asking him again to act on this for the benefit of folks around the state. And I want to be clear, this isn't like a Republican priority. There seems to be some unwillingness on the part of Democrats simply because of the Republican administration at the national level. But, you know, in the city of Seattle, a third of the students go to private schools. So this would allow folks who can't currently do that living in Seattle to maybe take advantage of that opportunity. Right now, they just really rather sit on the sidelines and allow that opportunity for the very wealthy instead of joining in and allowing that opportunity for other folks who may choose that for their children.
Yeah, this would be the most insane cell phone this year if we don't do this. We're talking of over $700 million. It is not coming out of the state budget. It's not coming from taxpayers out. It's not a net deduction on their state taxes. And the benefits are incredible for students, right? I mean, think of the different ways students can access these supports to better their education, you know, get better tailored what their needs are to their educational goals and priorities for that year. Also, we got to be clear. Private school is already an option for the wealthy. We know of countless politicians here who may fight against the private schools, but then send their kids to them. They have a luxury that a lot of families across the state don't. And so the idea that we would snub our nose at something for political reasons is frankly irresponsible and asinine, in my opinion. And, you know, we've seen other Democrat governors do the right thing. Governor Polis has agreed to sign in because he's putting his Colorado kids first before politics, which is what we should be doing in all of this. So I'm confident the governor will do the right thing and sign on to this, because I would hate to be the one to have to say, why did I turn away almost $1 billion to help kids improve their educational outcomes? And trying to come up with that kind of answer is that's going to be some pretty tricky political maneuvering from the governor if he chooses to go that way.
Thank you.
All right, the next question comes from Drew Mickelson at King 5. He says, the bill regarding initiatives created concern from the current and past secretaries of state. What are your concerns about it, and do you think that it has enough support to pass?
I just think it's undemocratic. I mean, look, we have the access to direct democracy in our Constitution. It should be one of our most cherished rights to put an initiative directly in front of the legislature, in front of the people, to provide for referendum. And what this bill does very clearly is disenfranchises the voters from, you know, and makes it harder for them to do that. We already have a very high bar. For initiatives, you have to come up with over 400,000 signatures. That's a hard thing to do. It's not like they're falling out of the sky. And we have had a few more in recent years, but not an overwhelming amount. I think this is simply an effort by the Democratic majority to stop the feedback. They don't want feedback on their policies, and I think they're wrongheaded, and there's a good reason. Both the current Democratic and previous Republican secretaries of state have stood up and said, hey, this is bad for people, bad for the process, bad for democracy. Don't do this. Hopefully that message will be heard by our Democratic colleagues, and this bill will be set aside.
Yeah, I agree with Senator Braun. I think this is pretty shameless. It's a pretty shameless way of trying to silence the people because they are, you know, maybe not going along with your entire, you know, legislative priorities, and they may have their own ideas. I think it's also important for us to call out, as Senator Braun did, and thank the people that are standing up to their own party to say this is wrong, and you know it. It's Secretary Hobbs, former State Senator Reuben Carlisle. These are, you know, Senator Carlisle and I did not agree on much, but I appreciate the fact that he's willing to stand up and say it. And I think a lot of people realize what this attempt is, right? This is a continuation of a many sessions long assault on the initiative process because it's inconvenient and it challenges the leadership of the Democrat majority. So I am hopeful and confident that we're going to see this bill defeated because the people want the initiative process. Good, right or left, right? We've had initiatives from both sides that have passed stuff that the legislature was unwilling or unable to do. So here's to hoping that the right thing is done this session.
If I could just add one thing here, is this is not the first movement in this particular direction. If you think back just a few years ago, the people used to have the ability through advisory ballot to make their voices known about the various taxes that the legislature passed. And then after overwhelming feedback from the public in opposition to many of the taxes that were passed, the Democrat majority came back with a bill the next year that removed the people's ability to provide feedback via the advisory ballots. We no longer have that. So this is a continued movement in the direction of removing and silencing the voice of the people of our state.
All right, and the last question will be from Shauna Salisbury at the Seattle Times. I'll ask it for her. Can you ask a question for me about the bill that just got a hearing this morning that would prohibit ICE agents hired under the second Trump administration from future law enforcement jobs in Washington state?
Well, I guess I'll start off here. I mean, see our previous conversation around crafting state policy for federal issues and messaging. This is a wrong-headed move. And I guess the question we got to ask ourselves is, how are we doing with our police force and public safety officers in Washington state? The answer is pretty bad, right? We continue to rank last in the country for officers per capita. And what does that get us? Just an ever-leaning shift downwards in terms of safety in our state. Property crime, we went from 10th worst in the country in 2019. We're now the 3rd worst in 2024. Violent crime is going up. Homicides, rape, robbery, assaults, these are all going in the right direction. And so our response shouldn't be, well, we're going to kneecap who we can hire. Obviously, there's a background and a review check on any officer that would want to be hired by an agency. And so I trust that our policies and procedures in place would be able to properly vet whether a law enforcement officer from one agency is properly able to serve in capacity as in another agency. So again, more political messaging that actually doesn't help, hurts Washingtonians in the short term and I think in the long term, and moves us in the wrong direction in keeping our public safe.
I agree.
I just kind of want to chime in on this as well. We have numerous bills that have been heard in our community safety bill or this session, and Roger Goodman, who is the chair of that committee, is constantly saying, if you don't pre-file or drop a bill before we get here, there's not time to hear bills. This bill was dropped in late January 23rd. So he's hearing bills that are probably not going to go anywhere. And then he's denying Republican bills, which are important to our communities regarding sexually violent predators. So they're taking bills from their own caucus and hearing them and not listening to the minority party on matters that really matter in Washington state right now.
All right, we will now go to closing remarks, starting with Representative Corey.
Yeah, thank you, John, and thank you everyone for being here. I think, our position in the House Republican Caucus is we are going to continue to push, promote, and publish solutions that can help fix Washington. We have been talking about affordability for years, not just this year when it became a political talking point on the left. We continue to see Washingtonians' paychecks erode and their buying power erode as we continue to add tax after tax after tax. The promised income tax that's been messaged from both the governor as well as the majority party's leaderships has yet to materialize. We've seen drafts of it circulating, but what we have seen are an onslaught of other new, more regressive taxes. After last year's most regressive tax increase in history, we have new taxes on clothes, on bottles, on any number of things, on tires, on fees. This is not going to help with the affordability crisis. This is going to continue to make us more and more unaffordable. We're seeing taxes on jobs, as a matter of fact, that was heard last week. So it's going to be more expensive to have a job in this state. These are real issues for working Washingtonians. And while there are issues that are out there that we need to discuss, these are the real issues that I think most people are hoping that we solve this year. And it's not some pie crust promise. It's not telling them we're going to do one thing, like we've seen with a lot of we're going to lower taxes somewhere else. So far, all we've seen is tax increases, more fees, more complications, making it harder to do business, harder to live, harder to work in Washington. And that's, not where the Republicans want to go. And frankly, I think that's not where most rank and file Democrats here want to go. But unfortunately, as we're seeing with a lot of the bills being introduced and heard, there is a fraction of the party that is running the party right now in this state. And this just, I would say, tilt left. It's more of a, getting hit by a rogue wave tilt left, is really having devastating consequences across the state. So we're going to continue to stand in the gap. We're going to continue to fight and call out what we think needs to be fixed. We're going to offer solutions, and we're going to make ourselves available with whoever and whatever in the majority party that wants to solve these problems with us.
Yeah, I'll just repeat that Senate Republicans will remain focused on affordability in the way we're driving. The Democratic majority is driving up the cost of living in so many ways across our state. And while I appreciate the questions that were asked around national issues, they are important issues and they deserve careful consideration, serious consideration. I want to make sure we don't get diverted from the core our core tasks here in Olympia, which is to make our state a great place to live and a place we can afford to live. So thank you very much for being here. We look forward to talking to you in the future.
Thank you, everyone.